So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to introduce the panel to two of our CEOs. So the first is an individual called Simon Sturge. He's had a stellar career in biotech. Starting in the late 90s, he was the founder and the CEO of a company called RiboTargets. He's also the CEO of a company called UKI2S, a company called Lonza. He's now an exec chair of companies and he's been a COO. Most notably recently, he sold UKI2S for nearly £1 billion or dollars, Simon. So what I would really like to do is just ask Simon to join in and have a chat with me about what it's been as he's what he's learned and what he's enjoyed as being a CEO and a chairman. And I go straight into some questions. So Simon, I've cheated slightly. I sent you some questions yesterday. I'm going to check. You've built companies and you've sold companies. Which is harder?
It's an impossible question to answer. I mean, if somebody wants your company, then it's very easy to sell it. If nobody wants it, it's very tricky to sell it. Either way, selling is quite a painful experience. A lot of people have been through house sales and purchases and know how stressful that is. It's no different from buying or selling a company. Really, you don't know whether the transaction has happened until the final ink is on the paper. So certainly from a pain perspective, I would say selling is buying and selling is more stressful. It's obviously building a company, is an all-encompassing 24-hour a day, 7-day a week enterprise, and but enormous fun and huge satisfaction when you get it right. So more or less difficult, can't answer. Certainly building is far more enjoyable and less stressful than selling.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick question, actually, which I didn't put on my list, but when you sold UKI2S, what were the major areas that the acquirers looked at, do you think? What were the things they were most concerned about when they bought the entity? And whether they were really relevant to manage at the foundation stage?
No, I mean, I think it's a very relevant question, and I think it's relevant to everything that's being discussed today, is you have to have in mind, almost from when you set out, ultimately, what is your market? And I was really interested to hear from Adam those words about IQ, because I think so many early stage companies, particularly technology driven, actually set off without, they have a view of a real innovation in technology, but not necessarily a view of, well, actually, is the market going to accept it? And so I actually thought that initiative in IQ was, and I would encourage people to really encompass that, to think about, what is my market? Who's going to be interested? If it's a technology or a product, who are we going to sell that to? And that's no different whether you're a startup or a much more established company. So in our case, it was very much driven by clinical data from a product, and then knowing those companies who would be very much interested in that product and in that field. So really, this was very much about the clinical asset, the clinical data, and the ability for really Sanofi to take that forward to develop that product. Second to that, if you buy a company, whilst you may be predominantly interested in one asset, you want to know what else is in the box, both good and bad. So nice assets, but also liabilities as well. So yeah, a lot of due diligence is done by the acquirer, not just necessarily on the very specific asset that they're most interested in.
Thank you. So it's hard work running a company. You've been in senior management of these companies for 20 years now. Looking at your LinkedIn profile, you've been a CEO, a COO, and a chairman. They all have to work together and they have different roles. And a lot of our audience now are thinking about starting a company and I suspect would like to join at a senior level and run with it over time. What do you think each one of those three roles should do to help each other? How do nascent academics transitioning into being the CEO of a founding company need to think about their staff and work with their chairman and the CEO and vice versa?
Yeah, no, I think it's a very common message, and that's really a complete alignment on objectives, outcome, philosophy, people. All of those things are incredibly important. And you're right. I've started a company with an academic scientist spun out of the Medical Research Council, and it was myself and that scientist who founded and built that company. The two of us started that. We had really good complementary skills. But as the technology and the products evolve, it's really important that not just on day one, but as the market evolves, as the technology evolves, as the products themselves evolve, that you continue to be 100% aligned on, what is the goal and what is the mission of the company. And that's very similar whether you're in a, tens of thousands per person company selling billions, all the way down through a startup with the two of you. It's much easier when there are two of you to be aligned. It's actually also much easier to become misaligned because obviously in a larger company there are many other. Well, it is like a little bit like an oil tanker. It has a degree of momentum that will continue regardless of the views of individuals. So yeah, I would really say maintaining that alignment of the entity of the company, the philosophy of the company, and what that company is there to achieve, and reviewing that on a regular basis is really important.
Okay, good insight. Thank you. So, to take you back to the beginning of your career, you've run service businesses that are generating revenue and biotechs that are taking drug development risk. We have an audience that has potentially quite a range of different ideas in mind, and I'm really interested in your thoughts on any tips for a good high-risk biotech company versus a revenue-generating service business.
Yeah, as I said, I've run both, and my experience is on those two sides is, and it comes back to the comments made about market validation. If you're building a technology, you may be sitting there in your lab, wherever, thinking, wow, we could do this like that and really transform this piece of technology. And that may be absolutely true, but actually in the context of a drug development program or whatever, that bit of technology may be quite a small bit, and maybe it halves the time or halves the cost of doing that step. But if that step represents only a fraction of the cost or a fraction of the time, then to be honest, halving it is irrelevant. And I've seen quite a few companies develop innovative technologies that are then looking for a marketplace. And that is a real struggle, because you haven't done that market research upfront, and that won't come naturally to most scientists who are looking at developing a technology. You'll be thinking, this is amazing piece of technology, and you won't have a clue of, well, actually who is going to be interested in buying this, at what price, how many am I going to have to sell to actually be able to maintain this business. And that's just very simple basic business economics. So understanding that, I think, is absolutely critical. So service businesses are, I think, really tough. But you have to, unless you really know your marketplace and where you can add value and who's going to appreciate and pay the right price for that. Also, inevitably, you have to, that commercial side of the business becomes a more and more dominant factor, in that obviously you'll have sales, you'll have costs, and you'll have to maintain those sales and bring in that money in order to sustain the cost base that the company will have built. So it really is a true operative business. Whereas on the other hand, drug discovery and drug development, most biotech companies will never see revenue from their product. The product will be licensed or acquired by a large pharma company. And then once again, really knowing what the market opportunity is incredibly important. And once again, in my experience, it takes as much scientific risk, or there is as much scientific risk, it takes the same amount of time, same amount of costs to develop something that's in quite a niche market compared to something that is actually in quite a large market opportunity. So if given the choice, I would always look at investing in programs where there is a large market opportunity, because it just gives you a lot more financial options. And as I said, you will be burning cash like crazy. And it gives you many more financial options because so many more parties will be interested in that asset, whether it's venture or pharmaceutical companies. And also, I've certainly witnessed that on many occasions, it's not necessarily the best product that makes it to the market. So becoming obsessed about having the best product, while scientifically, incredibly laudable, actually first to market is a huge differentiator. Patents become incredibly important in that. And so understanding that environment that you're working in, what the product is, and the market opportunity, the better you know that, the more financial opportunities or options you'll have to fund your company going forward.
Thank you. Well, one last question. Go right back to the beginning of your career. You were the founder of RiboTargets. It's a university spin out, and I suspect it's a good case study for quite a lot of our audience. What did you do right and what did you do wrong? What is the mark of a good university spin out?
I think that the really positive thing about a university spin out is that relationship that you have with that academic environment and all of the scientific support that has. And maintaining that is incredibly important, because you will require multidisciplinary input into your organization, and you don't necessarily have the funds nor wish to build all of that on day one. So really maintaining those links, I think is incredibly important. Being really focused instead of what it is you're trying to achieve, what the milestones are that your investors are also looking at, and how you're adding incremental value to your business. But having said that, at the end of the day, this becomes an entity in its own right, this spin out. And let's face it, not all technologies work. Not all innovations work. So you have a choice there. Do you just fold it, or do you adapt? And I think that flexibility to understand, look, guys, this isn't going as planned. We either fold or we evolve. And I think often you see companies overly focus on trying to resolve a problem to really the detriment of saying, no, we should change direction if we can. So the beauty of these small companies is their ability to be flexible, is the ability to be really single-minded, but actually having that discipline of saying, guys, this isn't working, we need to evolve, is really, really difficult. And that's where I think, you talked about earlier, being in an environment, having a chairman, having a board of advisors to help that discussion of when to evolve rather than to continue to pursue something that may not be going anywhere is really, really important.
Simon, an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your answers and your thoughts.